Socrates and Òrúnmìlà, the two patrons of classical philosophy, is a 2015 book by Nigerian philosopher Sophie Olúwolé. This book explores three themes. 1. It explains classical Yoruba philosophy. 2. It provides Olúwolé's views on the field of philosophy. And 3. It explores the relationship between idea and matter, our mind and the material world, which is a branch of philosophy called Metaphysics. Olúwolé wants us to change how we define philosophy in general and African philosophy in specific. So what is African metaphysics? Starting on this note, Olúwolé believes that a narrow view of metaphysics is used to exclude classical African philosophy, but more crucially, an entire systematic way of thinking about reality, complementary dualism. She defines two major systematic conceptual frameworks for understanding reality: monism and dualism. She defines monism as the view that although matter and idea appear as two distinctive features of reality, only one of them is fundamental, the other at worst does not exist. Dualism, on the other hand, is the theory that reality is made up of two features, namely mind and matter. She shows that some Western thinkers, such as Descartes, have developed dualism to suggest that mind and matter both exist, but in opposition to each other. The view that matter and idea are oppositional in nature, and that there are no recognizable intermediate possibilities between them, is one of the most central canons of rationality in the Western tradition of philosophy. For Olúwolé, there's another way to think about dualism, wherein mind and matter complement each other. This kind of thinking is different to a monistic framework, which rejects either mind or matter, and any dualistic framework, which is oppositional, which accepts both mind and matter, but claims they cannot be reconciled. This is the reason she gives for popular rejections of classical African philosophy, since much of classical African philosophy is not oppositional. If scholars have remained intellectually unbiased, Western educated scholars would have removed the blinkers which prevent them from appreciating the fundamental error in insisting that humankind is given to thinking in the oppositional form, in which there is no other rational option between two apparently opposing existence. There is also the problem of many scholars in the West, and some contemporaries in Africa, believing that classical African philosophy is not systematic. These scholars believe that Africans traditionally express their ideas, beliefs, and views in emotive, non-rational, and unscientific terms, that these ideas, beliefs, and views were all expressed in an oral form that gives no room for analysis, criticism, arguments, and counter-arguments, that there are expressions of myths, proverbs, tales, and metaphors, which are bold and non-critical, and views are commonly shared by all members of an entire society. The ideas and views expressed in these forms of thought are subjected to neither the laws of logic nor the verdict of human experience for rational and empirical validation. They are, at best, folklore, which is broad, vulgar, and non-critical philosophy. These scholars further claim that African philosophy is replete with a near innumerable number of spirits, ghosts, gods, and goddesses, including those of the dead and the unborn, claiming that such philosophy is more akin to religion. Underpinning this critique of African philosophy is how people view or understand its abstractions. For Olúwolé, the classical understanding of philosophy was wisdom, and such has been displayed in classical African philosophy to a comparable degree at the time of Socrates and Plato. Seemingly, a rejection of classical African philosophy is more accurately a rejection of complementary dualism. Olúwolé also makes two very important defenses of classical Yoruba philosophy. First, the arguments that doubt Òrúnmìlà's philosophy on the basis that it was passed on orally is countered by the fact that Socrates also did not write down any philosophy, and his ideas were communicated by Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes, all with particular reasons that might make us doubt elements of their portrayal of Socrates. For Olúwolé, it is only important that philosophy, whether oral or written, is systematic in its approach. Second, on this very point of systematic approach, Olúwolé claims that divination, as a method used in the Yoruba classical age, was not merely religious. It did contain prayer, sacrifice, fasting, worship, and rituals as essential parts of their religious obligations, but, like in most ancient traditions in the world, There were no hard lines drawn between religion, philosophy, science, and social studies. So what is Òrúnmìlà's method and how is it systematic? Olúwolé claims that predictions are arrived at through the use of mathematical laws of probability, and Yoruba divination is rooted in a process of determining infallible truths or God's will, precisely because Òrúnmìlà believes that people cannot possess absolute truth themselves. But the way in which people attempt to access that truth through divination is systematic. So let's unpack Òrúnmìlà's philosophy. Òrúnmìlà had a variety of beliefs, such as claims that reality is made up of two inseparable elements, and that truth is what the great invisible God uses in organizing the world. The latter is comparable to Socrates' beliefs that the highest truth is that which is eternal and unchangeable. In some areas, both philosophers have identical beliefs. For instance, Socrates claims, "For my position has always been that I myself am ignorant of how these things are, but that I have never met anyone who could say otherwise, any more than you can, and not appear ridiculous." Òrúnmìlà similarly claims, "I want to find out if any of my colleagues who believe they know the beginning and end of matters can make good this claim. I myself do not know these things." Olúwolé shows further comparisons between these philosophers along themes of reality, truth, knowledge, ideas, education, religion, destiny, death, virtue, evil, kindness, forgiveness, vengeance, money, leadership, the state, political rights, and women's rights. They have similar views on an ideal life, education, social development, avoiding wrongdoing, embodying virtue in how we live, and the need for critical analysis. There are several areas where they agree, but there are also clear divergences. For instance, Socrates saw good and evil as separate opposites, where Òrúnmìlà views them as an inseparable pair. Socrates viewed women as unequal to men, but Òrúnmìlà argued that all are born equal, claiming also that experienced men, experienced women, experienced youth, and experienced foreigners have equal political rights to run the affairs of state. Another salient difference is on what philosophy is. For Socrates, a philosopher achieves a glimpse of ideas in the ideal world created by God, rather than knowledge of a world accessed through human experience, since that knowledge is only of an imitation. Òrúnmìlà agrees that there is an unchanging and everlasting truth emanating from God, but claims that humans cannot even glimpse it. Instead, we pursue a different truth through sense experience, discussion, and critical analysis. For Òrúnmìlà, a philosopher is someone who achieves the highest truth possible to humans, but still not the absolute truth only possible to God. There is an end to human truth. For Olúwolé, what truly separates Socrates and Òrúnmìlà is that Socrates believes that matter and idea have independent existence, whereas Òrúnmìlà held the view that matter and idea constitute an inseparable pair, both in nature and in functioning. For me, this is the most important part of Olúwolé's book, unpacking complementary dualism. So what is Olúwolé's metaphysics? We start by saying all philosophies are drawn from a conceptual framework, which is the theme which gives thought its internal consistency, its wholeness, its originality, in such a way that to understand a thought is to grasp hold of it by that unspoken principle which unifies and illuminates it. In other words, a conceptual framework is the underlying scheme that informs how philosophical statements are developed. Frameworks develop from a perception of reality, Olúwolé supports. This can be expressed as one's inner eyes. For Olúwolé, a conceptual framework believes reality consists of either matter or idea, monist, or both, dualist. She separates monism into two areas of thought: materialism, which prefers matter, and idealism, which prefers idea. Dualism is also split between oppositional dualism, which claims matter and idea cannot be reconciled, and complementary dualism, which claims they are interdependent. For Òrúnmìlà, matter and idea are inseparable and complementary in nature and function. This is based on observation of the world, seeing in it the pairing of parts. An example of complementary dualism is found in the Yoruba belief. When reason is stretched to the limit, folly becomes inevitable. Olúwolé also references Ramossa's view on Ubuntu to show how complementary dualism in classical African philosophy does exist. Ramossa argues that Ubu and Untu are two interrelated ways of being. Ubu could be seen as the generalized understanding of being, the overall state of being, and Untu as the sense in which reality becomes perceptible to human senses, or the concrete and specific state of being, but that they are one continuous wholeness rather than an independent fragment of reality. This shows a dual nature of being, which is both ontological, the essence of being, and concrete, the perception of being, interacting to create a wholeness of being. Òrúnmìlà shows how classical Yoruba philosophy is systematic, how complementary dualism functions as a conceptual framework within metaphysics, and then how Yoruba philosophy is a case of complementary dualism. In doing so, Òrúnmìlà is not necessarily settling debate on whether African metaphysics is equal to Western metaphysics. She believes such a topic can be discussed but not resolved, but she also believes efforts to compare the superiority of such systems are likely in bad faith. After all, what we can do is show that they are both philosophies and that they are different philosophies. Philosophies from two different cultures of the world must share some universal features to pass muster as critical philosophy. They must, however, differ in some substantial way to be classified as two cultural traditions of philosophy. In other words, features that authenticate them as members of the same discipline cannot be those that establish their sound differences. For Africans, Òrúnmìlà criticizes a rejection of systematic thinking in favor of non-critical ways of being. She suggests first that the claim that Africans are religious people who are oblivious of the crucial role science and technology plays in the development of the human society is not factually true of all ancient African societies. Second, she states that beliefs that claim only white people possess the natural ability to think in scientific, rational, and critical terms are racist. So attempting to form an African way of life that does not rely on systematic thinking is reliant on racist pseudo-theories. In displaying a conceptual framework for African classical philosophy, Òrúnmìlà negates such a view of Africans and creates the opportunity for African philosophy to develop. That is a task Òrúnmìlà leaves to us and our inner selves. Now, in all my problems and travails, I will always consult my inner self. My inner self, you are the only reliable consultant.